All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you decide to watch this project and grade it. Figure we cover all the bases. My name's Sean Ferraro. My project is The Price of Escapism, exploring the profitability and price strategies of the current video game industry. So let's get into it. Just a little background, how far we've come. It's been a long time since, the original Nintendo and two buttons. I know that's when I got hooked. Um, Video games are now the number one revenue generating source of entertainment in the world. It surpassed movies a few years ago. So it's a very large market, and there's a lot to understand. So the main things I wanted to explore was profitability, the three biggest models currently: classic, free to play, and subscription services, and talk about pricing strategy, which is basically decent measure of consumer demand and what gamers will tolerate. So I'll start with the classic sales model. This is the one most people are familiar with. You buy the game complete up front, finished, all at once, $60. Buy it once, it's yours forever, just like buying anything else. I know it seems a little obvious to explain, but it's becoming, less than half of the way games are played and purchased these days. And obviously, slightly higher barrier of entry. $60 up front as opposed to the free to play, which we'll get into. And something we'll need to bring up later, but Elden Ring, a game that came out last year, $60. Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a game that came out in 1998, brand new, also $60. The second is the free to play model. This is games that have the term sometimes is called gacha mechanics. Gacha, the Japanese word for the vending machines where you put your money in and you don't know what toy you're going to get. Same thing with a lot of free to play models in a game like Diablo. It's free to download, free to play, but the money you pay for is actually for in game currency that will either increase drop rates of certain items or allow you to buy a chance to get certain items. Some have criticized these as, borderline gambling mechanics. Shorthand that can be called loot boxes. And some countries like Belgium have already made them illegal because they see them as gambling for children. Uh, the other thing about the free to play model is another kind of corollary to gambling. It does sort of follow the gambling model of quote unquote whales, as in about 10% of your player base usually generates about 90% of your revenue. Most people will just suffer through the long grind because a lot of the same items that you can get with money, you can get by playing the game, but you're talking about like thousands of hours of in-game grinding as opposed to, paying $5 for like 10 seconds. So, uh, some have accused these systems as predatory. Others see them as, it's a way to lower the barrier of entry. You can download the game for free, and you don't necessarily have to pay for any of the paid features. Uh, but some companies are going this way. It's a better way to generate long-term revenue as opposed to just the short with the game release. And then the third model is a subscription model. This is more of like a Netflix type thing where you pay for the ability to play a back catalog of older games. Usually these are bundled with online services, and most game systems will make you pay to use their online servers and play games with other players across the world. So uh, it's a cheaper alternative. Again, $60 a year for a whole back catalog of games. But the other thing is, almost no new games will be on it. Anything that's come out in the last, say, year or so, it's not going to be on these services. You have to buy it separately, generally at full price. So here's an handy infographic to sum up the main three. Again, free and free to play is in quotes there. On purpose, it's meant to be ironic because it's very not free. There's a lot of money involved in them. So who wins? What's the best between the three models? And from what I was able to see, subscription services are the least profitable. Free to play seems more profitable on paper because of the multiple attempts to extract revenue out of the player, but it's actually the second best, and the classic model still appears to win in terms of raw revenue. To go into a little more in depth, let's get the subscription out of the way real quick. So Xbox Game Pass, for example, from the estimates I was able to find, only makes about 15% of its total revenue from the subscription service, which is pretty low given all the games that they sell, the different things they publish. But it seems like the Game Pass on the subscription model it's a good low risk, low reward kind of proposition. You can generate some revenue off your back catalog of games as opposed to just having them sit there, because most games generate all the revenue within a couple days of release day, and then it quickly tapers off. So, um, but you already spent the money with all the licensing. You already own all the games. So, getting a couple bucks a month out of people to play a back catalog that you don't really have to do anything for, it's just a little free extra revenue. Again, it's a low risk, low reward proposition. So the real head-to-head matchup is between Elden Ring and Diablo Immortal. It's a good apples to apples comparison. You got two dark fantasy games that came out within the past year of each other, and by the numbers, uh, Elden Ring through classic pricing, it saw revenue of about 800 million, and Diablo with its free-to-play systems only generated about 300 million. It's difficult to calculate pure profit because finding exact development costs can be kind of difficult. I dug through the financial statements of Blizzard and From Software, and it's difficult to parse out exact numbers. Most estimates put quote unquote AAA game development on average at about 150 million. So they definitely turned a profit, but as you can see, Elden Ring as a classically priced game generated more than double. It also reviewed much better, a lot of 9s and 10s across the gaming journalism sphere, a lot of Game of the Year lists, whereas Diablo, for again, it's an established franchise that never really had free to play or microtransactions in it, and it generated a lot of ill will. I think it's sitting at a Metacritic score of about 60 at the moment, and a lot of people were pretty angry at the grind and the gambling mechanics that they say got in the way of the core game. So that's also the issue of free to play kind of tries to milk more pennies out of its user base, but if you aggravate that user base in the first place, you might lose them before they ever come into your game and spend any money. So the limitations of this analysis, like I said, exact development costs can be hard to find. There are many games released in a year, so a larger sample of other games would shed more light on the subject, but I did focus on two of the biggest games of last year, so I could kind of draw a more direct comparison. And another limitation is, the indie game sphere. Uh, most games made by big companies are referred to as AAA games, and there's a robust indie game scene, and some of those games can be just as profitable, but they also use smaller development teams, and as a result, they generally are priced cheaper up front. You're talking more in the $10, $15 range, and also a lot of them do follow the classic price model and do fairly well for themselves, but that would be kind of some room for future analysis. And another thing I want to talk about is pricing strategies, what I call the classic game price hike and the failure of mixed pricing. So, like I said before, $60 at this point is kind of a tradition in terms of pricing for new games. It's just kind of what people are familiar with. You would think it would, waffle around more with economic factors, but $60 has been this kind of the standard all the way up to the current day. Like I pointed out before, Ocarina of Time came out in '98 and was priced at $60. Elden Ring came out last year and was priced at $60 brand new. Um, there's kind of a lot of fear around developers that maybe, again, raising ill will through raising prices through what's seen as quote unquote as the traditional price of games. Also, a lot of gaming revenue has been made up in those years in terms of revenue. Gaming's bigger now than it was then. They'd sell more per unit. But also with digital distribution, they just have to write the source code and then, essentially cut and paste it through the internet, which costs them almost nothing. It's not like the old days where they had to pay for cartridges or you had, burnt CDs, box art, and then you have to ship it. So all those costs. So there's a reduction in cost on the production side once the game's finished, and also they tend to see greater volume. So the prices managed to stay at $60 for the better part of 2 decades. But there has been a push lately to push that up to 70. I mean, some people said there'd be revolts and sales would tank and whatever, but that's not exactly how it played out. Two games of the current generation on the PlayStation 5, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and God of War Ragnarok, they were kind of the first games to be $70 brand new, but the sale numbers, show that there's still plenty of price elasticity in gaming. Ratchet and Clank sold 1.1 million, God of War sold 11 million. The $10 price hike didn't seem to slow their momentum down at all. Even Nintendo, a well-known, pretty conservative gaming company, kept all the recent releases on the Nintendo Switch to $60, but then the new Zelda that's coming out this year, they just released the final trailer for it and kind of quietly said, "Oh, by the way, it's going to be $70 instead of 60." And it's the same thing. If you're gonna, the theory seems to be, if you're gonna raise prices, it needs to be in a sort of next gen, perceived next gen experience, and people are willing to pay that extra money. Um, but again, they're pushing it to show that there definitely is more price elasticity than initially thought in the gaming sphere. And last thing I want to touch on is the failure of mixed pricing. Games that can be perceived as too greedy are almost destined to fail. Babylon's Fall is a full-priced $60 game that's loaded with microtransactions, made by a veteran developer, Square Enix, and the people who made Final Fantasy, and it was a net loss of over 100 million. It was the biggest flops of last year. The servers, I believe, are shutting down. You can't even buy this game anymore. It's been delisted. Uh, and same with Marvel Avengers, which should have been a slam dunk, given the popularity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But same thing, they charge $60 up front, and the game is loaded with microtransactions and cosmetics. And a lot of reviewers and other people said not only is the game repetitive and mediocre, but also it's like you have to buy the game twice. And again, 48 million. It was such a flop that I believe Square had to sell the license rights away from Marvel to make up some of the losses. And just a quick side by side here. That's the store from Diablo Immortal, a free to play game. That's the store from Marvel Avengers. You can see in game currency, cosmetics. They're still trying to milk money out of you when you've already paid $60 up front. And, raising $10 is one thing, but microtransactions and full price together generates a lot of ill will from the consumer base. And the game flopped. So, last conclusions to walk away with here. Classic game pricing does appear to be the most profitable. Free to play is profitable. It's got a low barrier to entry, but it can have the potential to anger your player base. Gamers definitely have some price elasticity as long as the game is perceived as quality and quote unquote next gen. And the main thing gamers will not do is pay twice. Don't charge $60 up front and have microtransactions on your game. It is a recipe for a sales disaster. All right, so I hope you found this informative, and that'll do it for me.